for those who can't make it, but it's great to see you all here. And you are part of the London hub at the moment. We're hosting this session. Some of you have been here before, hopefully. This is actually, as some of you all know, it's part of our series on the Systems Innovation Guides. We've been doing these now for about, for about 6 months or so. We've covered many guides already. We're in the third section where we're talking about the ideas, the methods and tools of systems change. And this two loops model is actually a really key one for talking about transitions and transition processes, as we'll see here now. So we'll be working a little bit on the mirror board. I'd love for you to join me. Maybe Manali, could you share? I'll just share this in the chat now. If you're able to join on the mirror board, please do. It's quite a practical tool, this two loops model. So if you get an experience with a canvas, that definitely be better than just us talking about it all the time. But we will start off learning a bit about the theory so that you understand that. So yeah, let's start up here. Here we are, and if you could maybe just to get warmed up here, grab a little sticky and drag it to where you are in the world today, so that you have a little experience of how to use the mirror board, and you're confident with that. So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and Manali can pick them up as we go along. Everybody have the link? Everybody know how to use a mirror board so far? Okay, so I assume everybody's happy enough with the mirror board, and we'll stay going. So, as mentioned, I'm going to give a short presentation here so we know what some of the ideas behind this. At the end, we'll give you the links that where these resources are coming from. We have both the guide you'll find on our website, and then the canvas that we'll also be using, and you'll find that on the website also. So this here, the two loops model, it was developed by the Berkana Institute a number of years ago, and it's a theory of change, or a way of understanding transition and change processes within living systems, or at least it's based on the idea of living systems. It provides us with insight into the simultaneous growth and decline process that are underway within a system during a transition period. In this way, it provides a heuristic for us to better try and recognize and connect the past to the future during a transition process. And so it's a very general model, as we'll see. It likewise gives us the possibility to try and come to some consensus about where we might be as a group in this process of change and the best actions to take at different stages. This guide will be of relevance to anyone involved in dealing with some kind of transition process within a complex organization. And it's kind of key to systems change, very, very characteristic of it here. So the model, as the name implies, is quite simple. It's two loops. This one here, the upper loop, and then the lower loop. So it describes two loops. The first of these is used to represent the growth and subsequent decline of the existing incumbent system. So that's this loop here. The second loop is used to represent the new emerging next generation of this system. So this one down here is the new system. It's illustrated here by a mature tree would be the incumbent system within the ecosystem. It's established and set up. Down here, we have the new growth in that forest, right? The seeds, the shoots, so on and so forth, where the next generation of that system, of the ecosystem, is going to come from. So that's the essence of this model, and it's helping us think about how those two things relate to each other and how a transition process actually involves both of them, right? That we can't ignore one, we can't just think about the new and the future, and we can't just stay focusing on the past. We need to think about both, and we need to think about, most importantly, how they relate to each other. But both of these are going to be part of this change process, and we're interdependent, actually. We're interdependent in this change process. We need to somehow make it work for everyone synergistically as best we can, because there's going to be lots of frictions and tensions between these, as you can imagine. Okay, so first thing to note is that these two loops are not connected. And that's interesting. It's telling us that this change process is not like a line going from here up to here, where it's going to be 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step like that. It's not linear. It's obviously non-linear, but it's discontinuous, right? These things are not, that loop isn't connected to this loop. So there's something discontinuous there. They're not really the same. Although they're part of the same change process, they're part of the same system. This is the same ecosystem here, right? But the transition from this loop to this loop is not going to be a smooth incremental one. It's going to be a disruptive one. It's going to be a transformative one. It's going to be a new paradigm, right? That's what we're talking about here. And this system is going to have to actually come to an end in some way. We can see that it does come to an end there. But the overall system is going to be continued. It's going to be renewed because there's a new one growing here, you see. So we know, we've seen this many times in ecosystems, trees growing, and then they fall and their offspring rise again. We know it happens throughout natural or living systems. We know this process. And we know also that there's death is part of that, and rebirth is part of that. And that's kind of what we're talking about. That's what we mean by discontinuous, that death, that end, and then the rebirth of the system again. Really core part of what we're talking about here. This model helps us to think about that. It's one of many models for thinking about systems change, systems innovation. Yeah. Okay, everybody happy so far with these ideas? Any comments or anything we should flag up, Manali?
No, the comments as of now.
Is the microphone okay for everyone?
Yeah,
or this is a comment? Yep.
I think
okay.
It was good to me as well, probably, I think. I hope
okay.
It's all right for Bess now. Yeah, okay.
Yep, okay. Great. So that's that. We're now going to kind of zoom in a little bit on this first loop, which is the incumbent system. Take a look at what that looks like. We get this idea, the two loops model. It's made of two loops that form a transition process, and there's the incumbent one, and then there's the new system. Okay. So here, this is the incumbent system, and it's going to rise, right? That's what happens when new systems form. They rise and they grow, like an economy industrializing and growing in GDP, or a young person growing into a teenager, an adult, and so forth. We know what that looks like. Ultimately, they become, in some way, the establishment in our careers, right? We go through a kind of education, and then we rise maybe up through an organization. Ultimately, we'll become part of that kind of establishment in the society or in some particular organization. And that's the incumbent system there. And the incumbent, as we know over time, the incumbents become kind of increasingly locked into a dominant paradigm that describes the world and the centrality of their place within it. Yeah, at the peak, there's often a false sense of permanence, a delusion that things will go on getting better forever, right? When we go through an industrialization process, we see, oh, we just think the economy is just going to keep on growing. It's going to keep on more GDP, so on and so forth. And this establishment starts to think that this is, as we develop along a particular path, right, we start to think that that's the only kind of path, that's the only way of doing things, right? So this might be, you know, the rise of finance in the modern era, the way that we do finance in the modern world. That's a particular way of doing finance. But over time, people who spend so much time in that system, they come to think this is the only way of doing finance, right? Or this is the only way, the fossil fuel way is the only way of doing energy, so on and so forth. So what do you mean by the incumbent or the established system rising? It reaches a peak at some stage. Those furthest from the center with an impartial view may well see the system is about to enter into decline. At this point, there may be signs of the first divides within the system between those assuming things will continue as such forever and those that start to plan for its demise. So eventually, all systems have a life cycle and all systems will rise and they will fall. The Roman Empire, you know, planets, stars, they come and go. People, we obviously come and go. Ecosystems, you name it. They all have a life cycle. They rise and they decline ultimately. And the question is, what kind of happens during that decline process, right? We know something, well, this is what really needs to happen. When the system is actually come to the end of its life cycle, what's needed is that it needs to decompose. It needs to be taken to pieces, and the resources that it has allowed to be shifted to the new pattern, the new organization, right? We know that's what happens in ecosystems. When a tree, it reaches its peak, it dies, and then what happens? It decomposes, and those resources get broken down, the nutrients get broken down, and they're made available for other creatures, the next generation, the seeds and plants and so forth, to use them, to recombine them into a new pattern. And that's ideally what happens, right? If we were moving, if this was the energy transition, we need to move all that money from the hydrocarbon energy system to the new alternative energy. And that's ideally what happens. It's not always what happens. More often there's resistance from the incumbent system, and they prevent that process from happening. They hold on to the resources, and we don't get a very successful transition. There becomes a conflict between the two. Here would be a synergy, right? The older system supporting the new one, giving it the resource that it needs. Quite often that's not the case. There's a conflict between the two. So that's the incumbent.
We just have one question, Joss.
Yep.
So the question is this loop model just for one agent in a system, or can we do that for the system as a whole?
It's more for the system as a whole, yeah. Like an ecosystem, right? That's all the creatures in it. Or this could be any, it describes a transition process in any kind of system. Could be education, right? How we did it in the industrial age, and now we know there's plenty of new opportunities arising in the age of the internet and online education, many new ways of doing it, right? So that's a whole system, which is normally the level that we're looking at here, complex adaptive systems. Okay. So this is the second loop. It's about the next generation of this system. In transition, something new is always born, right? The old system is dying, it's falling to pieces, but something new is always born. However, it may look very different from the old. What is important is that we try to grasp the full scope of the change and not limit our imagination. So this is a new paradigm. It's a new way of doing things that may look very different from the old one. And that's why it's discontinuous. If it looked the same, if it just looked like a bigger, better, faster version of the existing one, it wouldn't be a transition process. So these are the alternatives. Sometime around the peak of the old system, new alternatives to the dominant approach emerge. Outside innovators are there because they saw the decline of the old and left, or maybe because they have always been left out, or because they represent a younger generation, right? That's quite often how we look at change, isn't it? We think about a new generation bringing in new ideas, and we know there's a tension between the older generation and the new generation. So they may represent a younger generation, not conditioned by the old logic, who have grown up into a new set of possibilities that simply make sense to them. Okay, so those are this is the new system, the emerging one. And the idea is that there's 3 stages, the development of this new system. Firstly, forming networks. We have new innovations and they start to form loose networks associated with each other. And over time, if they strengthen and develop, they can become communities of practice. This is what the Berkana Institute is kind of positing, how this change process happens, or how this new system forms over time. And ultimately, they may become a system of influence, which is actually the next generation of this system and really taking over core functions of how it works when it becomes a system of influence. So that's the 2 loops. We'll look at them now in the canvas, but Margaret Wheatley and Deborah Fries, who came up with this, the Berkana Institute, also highlight some ways that we may enable this process to happen, and what we should be doing at each stage, right? We're going to look at it down below in a minute, but this is about supporting the new. Their approach to describing the new as being about, to developing the new is about connecting, nourishing, and illuminating. Naming, connecting, nourishing, and illuminating. They try to name the pioneers so as to make them identifiable, connect them so that it will become something more than their individual initiatives. So this is the naming. You first have to be able to name these things, or else we're not going to be able to find them. They actually give the example of alternative technology way back in the 20th century when it was just getting started. Some people playing around with wind, and some people playing around with solar, and others with water, how we can generate water energy from the flow of water. And at that stage, they maybe weren't really aware of each other, weren't really aware that they were part of some new kind of movement that we can recognize today as alternative technologies. So maybe at the beginning, it took some kind of naming to say, actually, you guys are doing something similar, right? You're working in solar and you're working in wind and so forth, but you're all part of this new alternative technology thing. So for people to find each other, they sometimes need a name, and they need to be labeled so that we can see them, make them visible, recognize that they exist. Then we need to connect them, right? So that they can actually start to form this kind of community of practice. They can be more than the sum of their parts. And then nourishing, giving them whatever resources it is they need to develop and grow, and ultimately illuminating, right? When this becomes a functioning next generation version of this system, we want to be able to illuminate, show to others that there is another way of doing things. And that's the illuminating. It's like we give case studies to show people that something can work.
Just a quick question. Was Papas that when you say we, whom would you exactly refer to?
Well, we as systems changes, right? So the whole idea here is that we're thinking about this as a tool for enabling systems change. So yeah, we could be going into any kind of system, right? It could be the food system, wherever, here in London, should we say. We're thinking about a new one. Let's look at the full version down here. We're thinking about a new food system in London, right? It's not working. We know that how the incumbent one works. It's industrial agriculture, and then it goes into supermarkets and so forth, and eventually it makes its way out to us. And there's a lot of problems with that. So we maybe intentionally are coming along with a group of partners. It might be, the mayor's office here in London, and maybe a group of supermarkets and so forth, the organic people who are certifying and so forth, Soil Association, and saying, we want to do something different here. let's think about what's the incumbent system. We might even have, you know, agribusiness here in the room, and would say, look, you guys, we think you're here in this incumbent system, and we think things are changing and they need to change. And we think there's new ways of doing things, whether those are alternative, you know, whether that's organic farming, whether it's regenerative farming or whatever it may be. Getting people in the room, and we're enabling, we're facilitating them using this kind of a canvas to figure out where they are in that system and how we may move from one to the other. So we is the facilitator, really the people who are trying to enable the systems change process. Okay, everybody happy so far? Any other questions or comments? So all makes sense. It's not, it's a relatively simple model. I will say that. Obviously a very complex process behind this. How you would change the food system in London would be a very complex process if you're really going to do it. So let's recognize that this is quite a simplified representation, but it highlights really key important factors, as mentioned, these kind of two dimensions to the system, and that we need to consider both, and we need to consider how they're working together. And the different stages here of how we might enable it. Okay. Great. So maybe you stay sharing the link, Malali, for the new people who are joining. Let's use the canvas. So this here, I just showed it to you, is the canvas we would use just to identify the different aspects here. We've got the incumbent system up here, the pockets of the future. These are the new innovations that we think are representative of the new system that we'd like to try and develop and see emerge as the next generation of this system. We have the emerging system here, which is what's happened when we put those new innovations together, like alternative technologies. What would the new grid, what would the new energy system start to be like when we start to put them together? And then ultimately up here we got, well, let's just follow the numbers, right? So number 3 there, number 4 is the incumbent system, and what needs to happen to this idea of hospicing is a key part of what they talk about. Hospicing is essentially taking care of the old system and enabling it to decompose successfully. So I think of it a lot like having parents, right? You don't just kick them out when they're 80 or 90, right? You help them to, we all know we're going to die, right? And your job as a young person is to try and help them gracefully make a transition, you know, into the next world or wherever they're going, right? And that's what we're doing here. These organizations, we know they need to fall to pieces, right? Those big oil companies, they need to transform, and we need to help them. We don't want to abandon them. We don't want to say, guys, there's no place for you in this new world because we're doing such great stuff and you're just in the old world. There's, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in that industry. They're not just going to disappear, right? If we don't care for them, we don't take care for them, they're going to make all this change process very difficult. So we need to help them transition to the new model. And that's what we mean by hospicing. It might be things like those people in the oil companies, you know, having to reskill them to make them, you know, be able to set up wind turbines and solar panels and so forth, so that they can see their place in the new system. We aren't just, you know, ignoring them, in which case we'll create problems for ourselves. Or in the media industry, right? It might be the newspapers. Where are all the journalists going to go from those newspapers? We need to help them make a transition to the new model, whatever that might be. Cool. So there we are, people. I hope it all, well, that's number 4. Let's stay going then. So that's actually laying out the model. And then, like we said, there's kind of a theory of change. What are we going to do? How are we going to enable this? We looked at a few things there. How are we going to enable the growth of this new system and the decline of the other, the hospicing of the other? So the first one we're saying here is we're going to connect these pockets of the future. They need to get together. At the end, they can't just remain independent parts, right? We're creating a new system here. And of course, a system is when parts come together, they interrelate to perform an overall function. So the energy example, right? It's not going to be solar, it's not going to be wind or any of these things. It's going to be all of them working together, and we're going to need a new kind of smart grid to do that. So we're going to have to bring these together and start thinking about how they can work together and connecting them. We're going to have to nourish them, as mentioned. We talked about that, right? They're going to need subsidies and stuff like this to get this new grid off the ground, and ultimately we're going to have to show people that this works. So there we go. Those are the 8 boxes. There are other ways of doing it. If you look at the canvas, we have two of these canvases. The other one's a bit more elaborate with a few more boxes to it. This one's a bit quicker. Hopefully you'll join me on the mirror board now, and we will experiment a little bit with this. So let's choose what sort of system are we going to talk about? What sort of transition are we going to look at here? We know there are kind of transitions happening in almost every area here. In energy, talked about water, transport, we're moving to micro mobility and mobility as a service, all of this, healthcare, governance. Let's grab one of these dots and vote. Which one of these systems should we talk about today? I'm going to go for, actually, one minute. Let me just, 1 minute, don't vote quite yet. Put this at the back. There we go. Now we're better. Okay. Does everybody have a link, Manali?
Yeah, I'll send them to people who joined late.
Okay, I think Bess wants to go for energy. Where? No. It looks like food or education. Someone want to vote for food or education to tip the balance here? Okay, education, it looks like. Let's go with that. Okay, education we're talking about today. Please join me over here, and we'll go quite quickly. We've just got 25, 30 minutes, so we'll go through them quite quickly. Obviously, the exercise here is to understand how this template works, how this canvas works, so that you might be able to use it yourself at some stage. So the first box, what does the incumbent system look like? Let's try and identify that. We are talking about education. What's the incumbent education system look like? Please grab a sticky and post it up. What are the characteristics of this system? The kind of core features of the way the system works. So of course, we're talking about systems change here, which is pretty fundamental kind of change. So we don't want very superficial things. We want to actually understand what's the structure of it, what's the kind of core paradigm to this? What's the way of thinking that's creating this system? So someone's asking for the name of the person who came up with this. Well, it's an organization called the Berkana Institute, and in particular, 2 ladies, Margaret Wheatley, who's quite a famous systems thinker, and Deborah Fries also. Okay, let's take a quick look at what you've come up with. So, characteristics of the existing system. Inequitable cost, prohibitive. Okay. Perpetuation, no longer linked to economic opportunities. Institutes. Okay, what do we mean by institutes? Someone want to talk about that? It's done by formal organizations, I guess is what you're saying. Okay. Universities, okay. So unequal cost barrier, rigid, forced economic model, closed system institutions again, factory-like production of workers. Yes. Interesting. There's a kind of dumbing down of diversity, isn't there? There's everybody's got to fit into the model, and it's very much a age-based system. What age are you? You go into this class, and then you fit into that kind of level of the curriculum, and then you move on to the next stage, and it's kind of batch processing, isn't it? There's not a lot of individuality here, should we say? So cost barriers, yeah, not as much emphasis on critical thinking and problem solving when it is inserted. It's too late in the game. Okay, must teach marketable skills. Hierarchical, yeah, the winners and losers. Unequal design to form workers with old model. Okay, teacher-pupil relationship. Alrighty. So that was thinking about the incumbent system. And second step here is about thinking, what are the pockets of the future? So what is a pocket? What's a pocket of the future? Pocket of the future is something that exists in the present that if it developed and grew, it would bring into being the system that we'd like to see. So they're like the seeds almost of the next generation of this system. What do we think they look like? Again, we could talk about like values, mental models, and structures, maybe different relationships between teacher and students, or people are talking about institutions there. So it might be something different from institutions. Let's just take a minute.
A quick question as well, just.
Yep.
I think it was Nicole, you can correct me if there's a different way, but I think it was when you're kind of using using the canvas. So how do you keep it objective, like basically free from judgment?
Okay, free from judgment. How do you keep it free from judgment? There's probably always going to be judgment here. The canvas is a tool. I guess you have to remember the context in which you're using this, right? It's not in the kind of context we're using it. We're just learning it here, right? So if you're actually using this, which is the point of it, what's that going to look like? A system change initiative is going to look like you getting together a group of people, facilitating a group of people coming together to change the system they form part of, right? That's what systems change is about. So this is going to be a tool, that's all it is, a tool, a template for them to start to recognize their place in the system and to start thinking about these different aspects here of how to change it. So there's going to be lots of judgment from all these people in the system, but there's a good framework here for them to start to see common ground and see where each other is in that system and see their own bias and their own perspective and so forth. And actually you can do this as a kind of physical workshop. You get like a rope and you put it on the floor and you lay down one of these, a big room, big group of people around it, lay down one loop here, one of the ropes like this, and the other one on the floor. And you get people, you ask them, where are you in the system? And they stand in that part. I'm in the incumbent system. or actually I'm very far down the line here, I'm about to retire in a couple of years, or I'm an innovator, I'm trying to do something new here, or actually I'm part of really the next generation of the system, I can already see what it looks like. And then they can bring in all their bias and perspectives and so forth, but hopefully see where each other is in the system, recognize each other. And that's the conditions for them potentially working together. Okay, so let's take a look at these. We're talking about the pockets of the future. These are the new innovations we'd like to see grow and develop. Horizontal teacher, a company, they are not masters anymore. Yeah. Self-directed learning, that would create a very different system, wouldn't it, if it was brought into, if it was used as a paradigm, a foundational idea that children or students can create their own direction, right? They don't actually need something laid out that's this year these books, and then next year those books, and that after that, and pass these exams, but actually they may know themselves, may be interested in following a path that's directed by them. So imagine that's a pretty foundational thing. That's almost a change in the paradigm. So if we did that, the system that came out of that emerged, if we develop that, right, if we stay developing that all the way through here, ultimately we'll get a system that looked very, very different, right? Just think of what it would look like if it was self-directed, instead of all these students sitting in the classroom passively absorbing a standardized curriculum. Okay, so online, 24/7, available for everyone. Project-based learning, that would be different, right? Because we don't learn by doing at the moment. A lot of our learning is quite theoretical and abstract. We learn in books and texts and maths and so forth. Projects, doing isn't really what it's about. It's quite theoretical. Okay, universal design, connected to real value and job opportunities. Focus back on the person. Focus back on the person. Okay. Yeah, I mean, thinking about the individual and their development, maybe that's what you're getting at here, instead of just the curriculum, really. That's a lot of what our educational system is about this standardized body of knowledge that experts create, and then we're supposed to learn it. And that's the whole criteria. Okay, visionary educational approaches, transdisciplinary, systemic, that would be different, right? So we definitely learn in silos at the moment, go from one class to the next, different subjects. There's no sense of interconnectivity between them. Learn how to learn. Great point, right? That's definitely not what you learn at school. You don't learn how to learn. You learn how to be taught, really. You're expected to sit there and someone teaches you, and it's about just absorbing that content. No one really talks about how do you learn, or how do you think, right? That's not a question that gets asked. That would be a very different system if we started asking those questions. Okay, decentralized, engaged learners. Yeah, right, engaged learners, imagine that. That would be quite different. Learning from peers, teaching in nature, individual journey disconnected from age. So I think that one should probably be an incumbent system. It's not really a pocket of the future, is it? It's not something we're trying to bring these are aspirational things we want to bring into being. Self-assessments, that would be interesting. All right, explorative, curiosity, cooperation. Okay, complexity inspired education. Great ideas, guys. Hopefully you get the idea. So that was number 2. Let's take a look at number 3. This is the emerging system. What would the system actually start to look like if we put those together? And what would this next generation system potentially be like? Let's do a little ideation on that.
There's a good question on the previous section, actually, that is the previous section about the one which is about existing practices, is that hinting to what is emerging, or is it something that we're looking for in the future?
This one here, the pockets of the future?
Yes.
Is this something that we're looking for in the future, or what?
Is it or is it hinting to what is emerging?
Yeah, both in a way. It's asking what are the things, the new innovations, the new things that exist, but they're still very in a nascent early form, right? So they haven't really been properly named or identified, right? They're probably, some of them are probably quite strange things, right? If we can't name things and they don't exist in the existing system, we often think they're a bit strange and they're a bit weird and we don't really understand them. And that's quite often where things start. Like when Mr. Tesla started inventing electricity, he was doing all sorts of crazy experiments, right? So that would have been a pocket of the future way back when he was playing with AC and DC electricity, and people thought he was a bit crazy. And we didn't really have a full name for it yet, right? What is this thing that he's able to send energy from one place to another through a cable? That's quite strange. That would be a pocket of the future. The energy system that we ended up creating, well, the energy system we live with now, we know what it looks like, right? But the system that started to form out of that is a bit more what we're talking. It took many different parts, right, to get the energy grid that we have today. So that's what we're getting at here. When we put different things together, what's the new system that can emerge? And we're talking about education here. So what are the different, what would be the system that when we put those parts together, it would start to look like? Okay, let's take a look at some of these for the sake of time. Digital and available anywhere. Yeah, it would be a kind of a pervasive learning would happen kind of anywhere, anytime, instead of going back to that idea about institutions up here, where learning is what happens at particular times in particular places that is within some sort of institution. This one would be flexible. Everyone could be a teacher. Equitable learning opportunities. Accessed by all individuals. Isolationist learning community, not a good thing. Okay, culture-related content. Teacher-parent-student relationships strengthened to enhance learning. Decentralized and more equitable, globally connected. Project and responsibility-based learning. Education is accessible for all groups of society. Yeah. Making it more kind of democratic and accessible, both time and both in time and space, 24/7 available. You don't have to be in a school. You don't have to pay high tuition fees. You could be learning anywhere, anytime, and that could be accumulating towards you know, your certificates and so forth. Okay. Okay, so this is the system that's emerging, and then so that's number 3. Number 4 is about thinking about how the existing system may be hospiced and, in a sense, repurposed, right? Reused, because we don't want it. We can never really afford for it just to completely collapse. Normally, in the context of systems change, the incumbent system is there for a good reason. It's supporting us at the moment, and if it collapsed, like we're having in Europe, right? We're having problems at the moment because of the crisis in Eastern Europe and Russia about energy, and we we couldn't really afford just for the whole, fossil fuel energy system in Europe just to disappear overnight, gas and so forth. So there's always a system that needs to be hospiced, it needs to be maintained to some extent, but enabled to decompose and be repurposed into the new system. The resources need to be reused. And how could we make it, how can we enable it? Think about all the teachers, right, that exist in this system, and that's their livelihood. That's how they earn their living. They know, and the people who produce the books, the people who work in the universities, so on and so forth. How would we enable them to make the transition to a new world? Of education? Okay, let's take a little look at what we have here. Teachers become tutors, coaches for real life student projects. Yeah, I guess it's trying to say what's the role of these people in the new system? I like this one. Teachers become tutors, coaches for real life student-led projects. Yeah, they could be constructing the projects. Great. Use buildings for other purposes. Yeah. All the school space could be repurposed and used in new ways. Allow the teachers to, or even, you think about museums and art galleries and so forth. They could be repurposed for educational kind of centers for people to get experiences and so forth. Allow the teachers to experiment, yeah, including parents in their children's education path. Very detailed evolutionary plan showing the steps and targets to get across the bridge. Okay, create multiplicities from the utilities. Multilities from the utilities. Okay, fun.
That's
Yep.
the idea that we create things that have one purpose, but they ought to have multiple purposes.
Yep. Like going back to the museum or art gallery, that could be multiple different things, couldn't it? A museum, it could be a kind of a multimedia center. It could be a school for people to learn. It could be many different things. Okay, fund to experiment with new forms of education, help institutions transition. Yeah, I mean, think about these universities, right? Some of these are multi-billion-dollar enterprises. Are they going to want to make this transition? How are we going to help them make that transition? The Harvards and the MITs that have everything to lose. We're going to have to get serious about thinking what's their role in this new world. Or in the media, right? The New York Times and the BBC, what's their role going to be in this new world of media? Are they going to like it? Are they going to resist this transition that's taking place, and so forth? So very important stuff there. It's really a key aspect of this model. So we were talking about the hospicing and enabling the old to transition. And here we're talking about connecting. How can we connect the new innovations So this would be like creating spaces for them to come together. Let's have a little think about this one. We've just got a few minutes left. How are we going to connect these new innovations? Maybe creating like a lab for a learning lab or something where we could bring in these new ideas. Maybe we could use like a university. No, like a museum as a learning lab, where we bring in all these new ideas and these new innovations, and we combine it with the existing museum, and we connect them to create a new learning experience based upon these principles here. Hubs, yeah, right. Hubs or learning hubs, we'd call them. Streets as schools. Yep. Co-creation, old and new. Yeah, you know, there's some, I don't know if you know Khan Academy in the United States, online learning platform for K through 12, younger, well, actually I think it goes all the way up to university, but now some schools have started adopting that platform and they're using it in their schools, right? The actual courses and content, and they're having children mentor and peer learn each other. That's a good kind of interesting relationship between the old system and the new system. Bring people from the incumbent system into co-creating workshops with people from the emerging system. Yep. Yeah, it'd be interesting to explore education like in this workshop sort of format. Teachers are like running workshops instead of giving lectures. Okay, we've got a couple more boxes. I'll just take a quick look at that. Project mixing disciplines, streets of schools, informal learning opportunities, platform to share best practices, yeah. Or platform for enabling collaborations between, you know, we could have all these innovations up here, but creating spaces to bring them together so that they can actually start to do this, emerge as a new system, right? We're not going to get a new system emerge. Well, to enable this, of course, at this stage, we're now talking about theory changing how we're going to enable this transition. So we're saying a key part of that is we have all these innovations. We want to see them form into an emerging system. We want to build and develop this emerging system here. Let's create spaces, platforms, ways of bringing these new pockets of the future together to start to connect them and start to form and get the emergence of a new system that can really start to take over. See the transition periods taking place here. There's a function. These systems perform societal functions, and there's a societal function that needs to be performed down here. Education, right? Every society, it needs to educate its children. It has some system for doing that. And this thing here now is going to have to start forming a system that's able to do that at some stage at the scale that's required. So that's what we're starting to talk about here. So number 6 is now nourishing, right? How could we really nourish the emerging system to help build it and so forth? Any ideas on that? We're trying to develop this new approach to education. What would, yeah, resource would definitely be part of it. Again, the connecting it back to the old system and providing some of the resources, potentially, you know, some of the resources from here. Like most of our, obviously nations have a budget for education, most of it's going up here. How could we leverage some of that to nourish and develop this? how can we repurpose existing infrastructure and so forth to nourish the new and enable the new? Okay, so let's take a little look at these. We've just got a couple of minutes left. How might we nourish the emerging system? Create good examples, recognize the value of this new education in place of prior accreditations, evaluate it transparently to showcase the value for gaps for improvement. Show success through multiple media. Okay, invite diversity, employ champions, reward for new system initiatives, create reinforcing feedback loops. Yep, funding, create learning and support centers. Okay, showing what success looks like. Well, that's what comes up here, right? The illuminating of the new system. Once something has, I mentioned Khan Academy, it's quite a successful case study in the United States and globally because it's online, but it's often illuminated. It's often held up as an example of what the new system, new educational system might look like. It's not actually doing it by age groups. It's doing basically teaching for mastery. You've got to master something before you move on. It's not when you become a year older that you just move on. It's quite a different way of doing it. And Mr. Khan, Sal Khan, who's been on the front of, I think Time Magazine and all of these, and on major television programs, illuminating to the old system, actually, there's something different and it works, right? Because it's quite a large scale now. So that's what we mean by the illuminating. And then, of course, the bridging. Important aspect. How are we going to enable these here, the people in the existing system, to transition to this new world? How can we build bridges from the old to the new? People who are kind of working at the intersection of the dominant regime and how that functions, and bridging to the new system and helping people make that walk, make that transition, make that jump, and not make it too difficult for them, or else they won't. These are bridges and building bridges. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there. That time's up. Hopefully this gave you an idea of what we're talking about here with the two loops model and transition, how it helps to illuminate and illustrate and identify and discuss transition processes in some kind of complex organization, whatever it may be. Okay, Manali.
Yeah, before the feedback, maybe I'll just walk through the links which are connected. So I think just on the boards beside feedback, there are links for the canvas, the two loops canvas, which George has presented along with the more detailed guide. And we have a next session, next event, which is on complexity thinking canvas. There's a link also below for you to kind of know more details. And along with it on the board side, where you can follow us on our social media for daily updates, along with join the hub to become a member, and wherein you'll have more details about the event and some guides as well. And sessions like these will also be uploaded on YouTube, so the YouTube channel is for that as well. And just the last bit was the first board. So I think we've started something from the last session. So I think it'd be nice if you could give us a little feedback so that we could better understand and conducting these sessions and workshops as well. So similar to previous, probably pick up a sticky note and where you'd align, and if you have any comment to it.
Yeah, from left to right, just 3 questions there, and you can put down any feedback you have, any ideas you have for improving these sessions. Great. I hope that was useful for you all. We're going to wrap up now. And as mentioned, next one is the complexity canvas. I think that's just next week. And then we'll have another learning session in about a month from now. So I hope to see you all again. Yeah. Take care, guys. Bye now.